So I'll get straight into it essentially. So really there's going to be four parts to this presentation. So part one is the job. What do I actually see my job is in terms of actually developing the vertical jump? How does this apply to the people that I work with? Part two is actually identifying how we're going to jump higher using jump profiling to identify what is a performance opportunity for an athlete. And I'll move on to that in a little bit. Part three is actually seeing how does this stuff work in action? How does it work with someone that I work with online? How does it work with someone that I work with in person 1, 2, or 3 times a week? And some case studies around that as well. And then part four is actually how would we improve someone's vertical jump within the context of their sports? For example, that's a goalkeeper going up to compete or a defender going up to compete or maybe someone in basketball. Actually looking at what does that look like. So part one, the job. Someone I would kind of look to eventually model myself on would be Lauren Landau, formerly of the Denver Broncos here. And really, I love what he said here. It's not a direct quote, it's adapted from what he said, but ultimately, as an S&C coach, your job is to develop the engine and hand the skills coach a better vehicle. Let them work on the driver. So a little bit more formally put from myself would be helping an individual or collective develop the physical capacity to excel to the best of their technical and tactical ability. So where I see my job is I will not make you any better at your sport, for example, football, but I can help you develop the physical capacity to help you do more of your best stuff at a greater intensity. So the job continued. A lot of players, coaches, anyone that I want to work with or anyone that wants to work with me will, a lot of the time, what they want is speed. Coaches, they may use different language terms, but ones I'm familiar with is we need players who can transition, they can press, they can react, they can arrive quickly. We need players who can consistently arrive where they need to be in the shortest time necessary. So luckily, we can measure a lot of these things, at least from a physical standpoint. So we need players who can accelerate, they can decelerate, they can sprint, they can change direction. They've got the physical capacity to do that. The physical underpinnings behind someone's ability to do this is, can someone produce force? Can they produce force quickly? And can they produce it in the right direction as well by having efficient techniques? Now, luckily, we can measure in the gym, we can train this, we can develop it in the gym in isolated contexts. We can measure someone's ability to produce force quickly, and we can get a proxy measure of it with jump variations. Generally, the higher you can jump, the better your capacity is to produce force quickly. So I'm a young coach really. I'd be 27 years of age. I've probably been coaching pretty much every day since maybe 2017. Up until that point, it was really kind of part-time internships and stuff like that, work experience. But between the kind of years 2017 to 2021, I felt I was quite good at getting people strong, people under my watch, let's say. People consistently got stronger in the compound movements, your squats, your RDLs, your trap bar deadlifts. Now, some people, in fact, most people would develop their vertical jump. So if we assess the counter movement jump, for example, most people would get better. Some people, however, got loads stronger, but it didn't make them jump any higher. And then finally, some people got loads quicker. When I assessed them with the timing gates, with the GPS, whatever, some people got miles quicker. Some people stayed the same. That was where I had the most kind of mixed adaptations, I suppose. And I've always felt I was okay at coaching speed, but under my watch, most people were getting a lot stronger. So really, that when I was having a look at my practice, really, and presenting this data to a coach, for example, and they might say, why isn't she or why isn't he any quicker? But I go, but they've got stronger in every single compound lift we've done in the gym. That's actually no good to them. And really, it led me to thinking, are we getting non-responders? Am I getting just people who aren't responding to the training? Or am I giving them inappropriate stuff? And that led me to start to delve into this more stuff a little bit more deeply, I suppose. My question was, how can I optimize the potential for transfer? Essentially, what clues do faster and better players or faster athletes leave behind? So looking into some data, really from the NFL Combine, a data set from 2017, we can see a strong relationship between the 40-yard dash and someone standing vertical jump in the way that they measure that with their arm swing. Now, generally, we can see there's a good trend the higher someone is jumping, the faster generally their 40-yard dash time is. Now, interestingly, when that's extrapolated to the 505, there is a moderate relationship between the 5-10-5 shuttle and the vertical jump. So it's not quite as strong as this strong relationship here, but there's still a clear relationship there, and that's potentially because there's potentially a little bit more technically going on here in terms of changing the direction of your body. There's just more at play. Maybe you can't muscle yourself through this as much as you might be able to muscle yourself through a 40-yard dash. That's in its simplest terms. In terms of my own data that I've collected with various football environments, looking at someone's 0 to 10 meter split with the timing gates, their 10 to 20 meter split, a 505 assessment, then looking at metrics from the GPS, for example, what's the hardest someone's accelerated within a specific task, what's the hardest they've decelerated, and also what's the max velocity that GPS unit has registered. And then comparing that with their hands-on hips counter movement jump. So we can see here, for example, that in the 0 to 10 meter split, there's a strong relationship there. Nearly 50% of the variance explained is between the counter movement jump and the 0 to 10 meter split time. So generally, the higher you can jump, the better your 0 to 10 meter split time is. And that's from working with 37 different players over the course of 3 or 4 seasons. Now we can see 2 players here. This player on the right is jumping nearly kind of 16, 17 centimeters higher than this player on the left, but they've got very, very similar 10 meter times. So what is it about this player that really they can't jump, they can't sprint as fast as what their vertical jump would suggest, and they're above the trend line? And what is it about this player? Why do they sit below the trend line? Why are they much faster than their vertical jump would suggest? And I remember reading about this in I think a book that's nearly 10 years old, but Strength and Conditioning for Football by Mark Jarvis. Is this player very efficient with the kind of force their lower body is able to generate? And does this player potentially want to work on more of their sprint technique to get faster? So that's just some things we can look at. But overall, we can see a strong linear trend. Now, when we open the distance out a little bit, the ground contact times, they become a little bit shorter. There's still a good relationship there with 27% of the variance explained, but it's a little bit weaker. When we extrapolate this even further, we can see there's more at play when we extrapolate to 30 or 40 meters, depending on the player. There's still a trend there. 24% of the variance is explained, but we've got a couple of players up here who are really quick, but they can't jump that high. So there's a moderate relationship there. When we look at acceleration and deceleration from the GPS unit, we can see as well the peak acceleration someone's able to kind of put out has a moderate relationship with CMJ performance, whereas the deceleration still has a moderate relationship, but it's a little bit weaker. In terms of a key study from Damien Harper, he found that counter movement jump height and peak velocity, essentially these are the same things. They are the highest separators of players with good versus poor braking ability. So what they did, they unpicked the counter movement jump into its composite parts. They looked at, is there a key metric? Is there a magic metric within someone's counter movement jump that predicts whether they've got good brakes or not? Is it the eccentric peak force, peak velocity, all these kind of things? And what they found was it doesn't really matter how you've jumped in terms of whether you've got good brakes or not. What matters is, did you jump high? So what they found, interestingly, was that the concentric force and velocity metrics should be considered the most important neuromuscular performance determinants. So essentially what that study is saying is no particular jump strategy or metric appeared to be associated with good brakes, but as long as you can jump high, that has some good association with being a good braker, let's say, and having good deceleration. So in summary, what we can see is that the CMJ height has a good relationship, strong relationship with the 0 to 10 meter time, moderate relationship with 10 and 20 in max velocity. There was a weak, if not a negligible, relationship with 505 time, and then acceleration and deceleration kind of moderate, whether that's down to the reliability of the data that's put out as well. It appears to explain linear speed performances over short distances better compared to longer ones. Acceleration may be slightly better explained than deceleration, and we could see that from the NFL data as well. So is there potentially some stuff that transfers better to acceleration potentially, or is there more of a technique and skill emphasis to having good brakes and having good change of direction? Maybe. Question is really, what other factors come into greater prominence as we extend distances, as we add in change of direction? Overall, I can be fairly confident that training, which improves CMJ height, may have some transfer to improving factors which can aid multi-directional speed. So generally, the higher you can jump, the better some aspects are of your capacity to be able to sprint nice and fast in multiple directions. Okay, part 2 is we've worked out that CMJ height is quite important and is a good indicator of someone's ability to be quick. Well, now let's start looking at how do we improve this stuff. So we know that the overall height is the goal. How they achieved it though, and we can look at breaking this down, might inform how we're going to make it better for the person. So really interesting here. From that NFL combine, you've got 3 athletes all within 10 to 15% of each other here in terms of 35 inches, 37 and 39 inches. But you can see 3 very, very different strategies. This athlete here on the right, at the bottom of the movement, that almost looks like a back squat. This athlete here, very little flexion, goes into quite a lot of knee dominance. The knees come way past the toes. This athlete here, the knees don't go very far past the toes. That looks much more like a sort of hip dominant strategy. So the end result is the most important factor, the position they hit here and the velocity they are moving at when they leave the floor. However, how we got there can give insight as to how we might want the individual to train and improve. So let's look at how do we isolate that. If you've not read this book already, Dan Clever, brilliant book in terms of force by himself, but read it again, and then read it again after that. But improve the end result, improve the velocity at takeoff, improve your jump height by accelerating and producing force as hard as possible for as long as possible. So we might call that impulse. You want to generate as much force as you can for as long as you can. So you could hit a greater peak force, you could hit that force more quickly, or you could just produce that force potentially over bigger ranges over extended periods of time. But accelerating as hard as possible for as long as possible is how you're going to jump higher. So step 1, if we've got an athlete's counter movement jump, how can we tell whether their athlete may benefit from more eccentric or more concentric training to improve it? So this is myself working with a very springy athlete here. So this is, first of all, assessing the counter movement jump using outputs. You can see that strapped to his foot. Simply dip and drive, hands on hips, a test we're probably quite familiar with. That's looking, what are you like with an explosive downwards phase to propel yourself back out. But then if we isolate that and we remove the eccentric contributions, you can see he goes down, holds it for 3 seconds, and then drives out. And you can see what I'm doing there. I'm putting my thumb underneath his shoulder, and he's just got to rip himself away. If I feel any pressure into my thumb, or he dips down a little bit before he goes, we know we're not isolating the concentric motion. So something some people might be quite familiar with is the eccentric utilization ratio. So essentially, what is the difference between those 2 jumps, which gives us a good estimation of how much contribution the eccentric phase would give that athlete. So how you measure this, subtract the pause squat jump from the CMJ, and then you divide it by the CMJ. Very simple. Gives you the EUR. I'm going to call it the EUR because it's a little bit quicker. So for example, you've got a 48 centimeter squat counter movement jump, a 44 centimeter squat jump. Difference is 4 centimeters, and you divide 4 by 48, and you get the eccentric utilization ratio of 8.3% or 0.083, for example. So if an athlete has an EUR of under 10%, that suggests they've got a relatively poor ability to utilize and load during their eccentric phase. So their body isn't great at recognizing and detecting a rapid and forceful stretch to be able to propel them back out forcefully. If it's between 10 and 15%, they've generally got a well-developed ability to utilize and load the eccentric phase. There might be some opportunities to improve what is happening on the concentric phase and removing the eccentric contribution. If it's over 15%, they might be over-reliant on having a forceful eccentric phase. And that might actually limit things like acceleration performance, where they've got to all of a sudden just switch on and explode and extend the hips from a dead start, because I suppose in a block start, for example, they don't get the benefit of that eccentric phase. So that would decide, are we going to bias an athletes to more eccentric training or more concentric training? Now, what's interesting is EUR, the literature would suggest it's not associated with performance or higher performance. So better, higher jumpers don't necessarily have really big EURs. And likewise, athletes that don't jump very high often have really big EURs as well. So it's not associated with performance. However, what it might do, it may demonstrate whether an individual athlete is optimizing their potential within the CMJ and its eccentric and concentric components. And these ultimately contribute to performance. So modifying common exercises then. So let's look at things we do all the time. Probably we're going to bias squats, deadlifts, and single leg or lunge kind of movements. If we want to apply greater eccentric overload and kind of stress that athlete and teach them to load and utilize that eccentric phase a little bit better, we might do things like flywheel squats or a touch and go box squat. So you're going to go down quick, well, not necessarily quickly, but you're going to go down and get yourself off that box nice and quick. We could do an RDL where there's a down and up phase. We could do a trap bar with a slow eccentric, or we could do like a floating trap bar. We might do a reverse lunge or single leg RDL, something where there's a downwards phase that you have to reverse. If we want to apply greater concentric overload, we might remove that downwards phase and the contributions it brings. So, for example, that might be an Anderson, maybe a paused box squat where you've got a pause on the box, then rip yourself away from it nice and quickly. Maybe it's an RDL from blocks or pins. You might do the trap bar deadlift from the floor, and then potentially in a single leg movement, that becomes a step up. So essentially, if the CMJ is under 10% greater than the squat jump, then we might bias more eccentric exercises. And if it's over 10% greater, then we might bias more concentric exercises. That's working out what kind of contraction. I mentioned before how a lot of people that I was coaching, most people were getting stronger. In fact, pretty much everyone was getting stronger in the gym, but not automatically up to a certain point where people jumping higher. And I think a lot of people, I was giving them heavier strength stuff when they actually needed more ballistic work to improve their CMJ. So using something like a loaded jump profile, essentially, starts off with a hands on hips kind of movement jump, and then you start loading them up using increasing 10 to 30 kilo increments. My preference is to do this with the trap bar. If you've seen my social media, you'll kind of see how that works. We'd aim for at least 4 to 7 sets overall, including the CMJ, with just the body weight. And you want to cut the CMJ height by at least 50%. So if you've got an athlete that's jumping 50 centimeters, you probably keep loading them up until they can't jump 25 centimeters because it's too heavy. You plot the jump height versus the load on a trend line, and luckily I've put a spreadsheet together which you can download after this, which will do all this for you. Now, this is where it gets interesting. As load increases, an athlete will be afforded more time to generate force. It's a slower contraction, but only providing they've got the capacity to do so. Now, the slope of the load versus height gradient will indicate how increased load affects that athlete's ability to generate force. So some athletes will absolutely thrive under it. Some athletes won't thrive under that slower, heavier environment. So essentially, the steepness of this trend line will indicate whether they are speed dominant or strength dominant within the context of this movement. So for example, here, this will be working with an athlete last year. So you can see we do the jump, hands on hips, we're using output here as well. And then they, for example, on this occasion, which was one of the first times I tested them, they got 40.2. That gave a takeoff velocity using output sports data of 2.8. And what we can do as well, we can multiply that by the athlete's body mass to calculate impulse or momentum as well. And there's a really good article, I won't go into too much detail on it, but using momentum and impulse to improve your ballistic exercise programming. Then we can see we start to load him up. Naturally, he's not going to jump quite as high, but the impulse has gone up. You can see now he's starting to drop off. Yep, 25 centimeters. It's heavier, so the weight of the bar plus him multiplied by the takeoff velocity. Impulse is still going up, yet. And by this point, it's that little bit too heavy. You can see him get a little bit stuck at the bottom as well. And impulse is actually starting to drop off. So what that looks like in terms of like 2 potential case studies, this would have been some data that I collected from 2 under 18 sprinters a couple of years ago with very similar, relatively similar 100-meter personal bests, 11.2 and 11.6. Now, what was also interesting was they had very similar CMJ heights as well, so 47 and 49, but they had vastly different profiles when we loaded them up. So you can see this first athlete with 1 times on the body weight, so they jumped 47 centimeters. When we loaded them up to a load that was equal to their body weight on the bar, they were jumping 20 centimeters, which was 43% of their CMJ. The peak impulse was 298, whereas this second athlete, 49 centimeters, actually had a higher counter movement jump, but with 1 times their body weight on the bar, they were only jumping 12.6, which was 26% of the CMJ. And you can see that impulse curve, it's not quite as high. So this athlete is kind of more powerful, more explosive. They're able to generate more impulse across the board. This athlete is affected more by having more weight on the bar. What we can do, like I mentioned before, you can multiply the takeoff velocity by the total load. Now, output will do this for you, but if you've not got that kit, you can just use some equations, which is simply there, the jump height multiplied by kind of gravity and the components of that. So, for example, an 85 kilo athlete with 65 kilo additional load, that would be 150 kilos total system mass, for example, multiplied by 2.2 meters per second gives you an impulse or momentum value of 330. What we can do for ballistic exercise prescription as well is identify a specific load which optimizes that momentum and therefore concentric impulse. So really that's quite a good load to work with for that generally athletes that want to be working ballistically, because they're able to get a lot of force in a lot of time, in a short amount of time. So with that data, we can use that trend line and we can compare it to some research from Bosco from 1986 and 1992. So this stuff really stands the test of time. So with Carmelo Bosco's PhD research, this is looking at really at which point is maximal strength no longer the biggest limiting factor to an athlete's CMJ performance. So their question is, can the athlete achieve 33% of their max CMJ when they've got 1 times body mass as additional load? Now, this research is from 1986 and 1992. It's published in a couple of different sources. All the data I've collected over the past 4 years, the mean, the median, and the mode value I get from all that data, I think testing over 50 different athletes with this stuff on multiple profiles, the mean, median, mode value is 33%. So even 30 years on, I'm still finding the same stuff as what Carmelo Bosco found as well. So I'm very, very confident in that as a threshold and as a number. Essentially, this is asking the question, for a given jump height, how strong is strong enough? So these values would represent strength targets for a variety of different jump heights. So for example, if you want to jump 55 centimeters, 33% of that would be 18 centimeters with 1 times your body weight. 50, 45, and 40. You can see the strength, kind of the max strength demands aren't as high for lower jumps, which makes sense. This would be me here, wearing some interesting trainer and sock combination. I think in 2016 or 2017, I can't quite remember, but collecting data, essentially trying to work out what relative loading is optimal for impulse and rate of force development. And we found that it was at a certain percentage, 1 RM, generally between 30 and 50% of the trap bar deadlift to jump with is optimal for rate of force development. So you can see this athlete here, we've got gym aware strapped up, we've got him jumping on a force plate. what we found is there's a strong association between max strength and jump height with 1 times body weight additional load. So that makes sense. If you can't lift 2 times your body weight, you're probably not going to jump very high with 1 times your body weight on the bar. Likewise, if you can only lift 1.5, you might not even get off the floor with 1 times your body weight. So there's a minimum prerequisite level of strength to jump a certain height. So to move 1 times your body weight with sufficient speed, that has to sit on a high reserve of maximal strength and the required force production. So these would represent work back from that data, work back from kind of data that I've collected over the past, I want to say 6 or 7 years really. For a given body weight CMJ target, we know using the Bosco Index how high someone would need to jump with 1 times the body weight on the bar. That would give a rough approximate trap bar deadlift target of 2.3 to 2.7, for example. This is how that might translate in an RDL or a back squat. And this would be how this might translate to a box squat to say 45 centimeters is a typical height that I go with. So maybe screenshot this slide, but if you're not able to get loaded jump profiles with every single member of your squad, for example, you can start to look at this stuff. If someone is jumping 45 centimeters, but they can trap bar deadlift 2.5 times their body weight, they may actually be strong enough, and we want to work on more ballistic stuff. But likewise, if I've got someone that's jumping 55 centimeters, but they're only trap bar deadlifting 1.9 times their body weight, then we've probably still got loads to get out of that athlete simply by getting them stronger. So this is modifying this approach to suit your environment. And you can probably have a think of where people are in that category. Who is super strong but struggles to display that in more faster dynamic tasks? Who is kind of very, very powerful but not very weak as well, not very strong as well. So simply, everything I've discussed so far, identify your target CMJ. For example, if you want someone to jump 55 centimeters, that might be your benchmark at your football club. Work out what the difference is between their CMJ and their SJ. If it's under 10%, then do your loaded jump profile, or just simply have a look at how strong they are according to those benchmarks, and then work out, is it eccentric ballistic or is it eccentric max strength you want? If they've got a difference of over 10%, same question again, use that loaded jump profile, and then they might be concentric ballistic or concentric max strength. So everyone that I work with now, pretty much, if improving their vertical jump is going to be valuable to them, and if improving their CMJ is going to have some impact, then we're going to go for one of those 4 categories, and we're going to identify how is best to do that. So for example, this might be modifying various different exercises, body weight jumps, bilateral compound lifts, Olympic lifts, single leg exercises, and maybe some isometric themes as well to fit these different categories. So if we've got someone that needs concentric max strength, we may trap bar deadlift them. If they want an Olympic lift, we might do a heavier clean pull from the blocks. Maybe it's a step up, or maybe it's a skater squat with a pause. And then maybe isometric, they have a theme where they're trying to produce concentric force. If it's eccentric work, then we might do some more yielding isometrics. If there's ballistic work as well, we might do some of Natera's ballistic isometrics. There's things around that. The compound movements become faster. They become trap bar jumps or paused box jumps. And then if it's eccentric ballistic, we might apply some eccentric overload. So they're just simply methods. You can decide what is best for your athlete based on how you program according to those 1 of 4 themes. So programming in action. So let's take this. So this is a fast, twitchy athlete. I believe this was a 200-meter sprinter that I would have worked with a while back, with very, very good, very twitchy, very ready for kind of stimulation, but a low S&C training age. They've done very, very little. So we can see their CMJ was 37.1. The squat jump was 33.9. That gives us an EUR of 9%. So I believed that athlete needs eccentric work. We want to get that difference to greater than 10%. The loaded jump was 5.5 with 1 times their body weight on the bar. So that gives us a Bosco Index. 5.5 divided by 37.1 gives us a Bosco Index of 15%. So they need eccentric work. and it needs to be heavy. So quite quickly, obviously we started on goblet squats, natural progressions through that. And then we progressed that athlete onto a touch and go box squat, giving them some overload, giving them some downwards force to aim to reverse out. We can see that that created some massive improvements in max strength. Obviously, those numbers are quite inflated because it's a small number, but in theory, we've got a 75% improvement in max strength, albeit a large improvement. We've got an 8% increase in the counter movement jump, which I'm pretty happy early doors, considering we did no ballistic work at all. We didn't even do any jump work. The Bosco Index was now 24%, so we're still going up, but that athlete still needs max strength work. They're still not quite ready to probably benefit from ballistic stuff. But the EUR has gone up to 16% now. So interestingly, the squat jump stayed relatively the same, but that athlete has got loads better at kind of producing force eccentrically, loading in and getting themselves out much quicker. So the next key movement was now a trap bar deadlift. Can you generate heavy stuff, heavy force quickly from a dead start? Next phase, we've got a decent improvement in the CMJ again. Yeah, pretty happy with that. Overall, we've took him from 37.1 to 42. Now we can see that the Bosco, the EUR number has become smaller again. Relatively, they're loads better concentrically. They're able to get off the ground from a dead start much quicker, but has that translated as much into eccentric performance? And now we've got a small difference again, and now we need eccentric work again. The loaded jump's gone up again, yet buzzing, and just about now we've hit that 33%. Now, I think this was like 32.8% or something, but I'm still going. They're just on the cusp of where they can probably start developing ballistic strength. But I decided to go with eccentric max strength with a touch and go box squat. And we can see that maybe that was actually the incorrect decision for that athlete. So they were still jumping a little bit higher. It was the smallest kind of improvement we'd had so far. A little bit of a drop off in the squat jump performance, a slight improvement in loaded jump performance. But again, this is very negligible. And really now I decided, I actually think in that scenario, that athlete has maxed out their max strength work. They have been doing it for 5 or 6 months. So we moved on to some ballistic work, trap bar CMJ at the optimal impulse load, and doing some depth jumps from 50 centimeters. Then the athlete had their largest improvement in May, and then they hit 46.1. So that work was probably quite appropriate. And I was really pleased to make that with an athlete who was already quite twitchy and explosive. Case study 2, this is working with a much older athlete, very, very, very proficient in all the Olympic lifts, proficient in any of the compound lifts. They're strong, they're powerful athlete with a high S&C training age. They've been doing it probably 10 or 12 years. I think this athlete at the time was 28, and they'd been doing some form of S&C program since the age of 15 or 16. Started off with 49.2, 45 on the squat jump. Again, a lower EUR, so we need eccentric work. With 1 times their body weight on the bar, 17.7. That's a pretty good score, but it's a little bit strength dominant. So we need some eccentric work, but it needs to be ballistic. So key exercises were depth jumps and trap bar counter movement jumps, identifying their optimal impulse load. We can see a big improvement here. They went from 49.2 to 52.8 in a month. Buzzing. Obviously, we've not worked on max strength. That stayed about the same. Again, the squat jump has improved as well, even though we've not been working on concentric stuff. But now the difference is larger. We've got a 13% difference. So I'm going, yeah, we need concentric work, but it still needs to be ballistic. We're just spot on the cusp of that 33%. So trap bar jumps, this time were done from a dead start. They were done from the floor. And we did some paused box jumps as well. And then in May, we got some decent improvements again. Very similar EUR. What was interesting is that the trap bar jumps from the floor actually improved the athlete's max strength as well. So there's some things around that. But we can see from March to May, we didn't lift a single heavy weight. I don't think they lifted a weight over 60 kilos, at least in the lower body stuff. But this got loads out of that athlete and their ability to produce force quickly. So what about improving jumping for the purpose of jumping, simply jumping higher? So potentially that athlete might be doing it with some kind of scouting combine, or they simply just want to jump higher for their sport, maybe go up and compete for more aerial duels or win more headers, for example. So using some general rules of thumb from a brilliant article from Joseph Coyne, which I'll feature in a minute, an athlete should be able to jump at least 10% higher with an arm swing. So that would be called an I'm not even going to try and pronounce that, but they should be able to jump at least 10% higher. That shows efficient use of the upper body. They're probably quite coordinated. They're probably able to use their body time in sequence everything together to really get themselves up nice and high. If they're not able to do that, then one thing I have found to be really, really effective is having small weight plates between 0.5 and 2 kilo in your hands and doing the vertical jump with them in your hands. I've really found it allows the athlete to feel the timing and the sequence of the arm swing. And then that's a really specific exercise that they can almost feel the weights almost pulling them up. And it's a really nice thing to do, just adding some small weights in the hand while they're doing the jumping exercises. More general things might be a push press, a landmine throw, an overhead med ball throw, a med ball slam, sequencing the upper and the lower body together. Ronaldo's vertical jump playing for Juventus, I think this was in 2019 or 2020, but a 1 foot approach jump, so taking off on 1 foot, and he jumped 69 centimeters, which is an absolute joke. He just towers above everyone. But using some kind of research and using general rules of thumb, again, mentioning this article from Joseph Coyne, your hands on hip CMJ, if we work one step back, the pause squat jump, we want that to be around 10% different. Generally, an athlete might be able to jump at least 10 to 20% higher with an arm swing. So if they can't do that, we're going to work on that, but they have a good hands on hip CMJ. We're going to do some direct, maybe transfer exercises. Let's say they can hit this, but they're terrible off a 1 foot approach jump. So normally, someone's 1 foot approach jump is going to be quite similar to what they can do with an arm swing. So whatever you can do, just taking with an arm swing CMJ is generally going to be there or thereabouts what you can do in a 1 foot approach jump. If it's not, you might actually want to work on 1 foot approach jumping. And then a 2 foot approach jump, so that's stepping in, taking off on 2 feet. That might be, for example, like dunking a basketball, but jumping off 2 feet is generally going to be around 22% higher versus your arm swing CMJ. And that's using some research, again, discussed in this article from the NBA Combine. So it will simply, if I had someone who's pretty good at hands on hip CMJ, but they can't jump within their sport, it would just be working through that process to see basically where don't they hit the threshold. Working that backwards from Ronaldo's vertical jump, I believe that predicts him to jump anywhere between 53 and 58 centimeters hands on hips, which is pretty impressive. Training thoughts. Use a box to drive intent. I did a social media post on this week. Just work on a specific aspect of the jump, whether that is concentric or eccentric force, and also using a box manages contacts and loading. Generally, a box height that's 100 to 150% of your CMJ is going to be a nice kind of target to go for. I love 10% higher than your CMJ. So, for example, if you can jump 50 centimeters, 55 centimeter box, try and land on that with straight legs. I love that. I just think it's brilliant. Adaptations that are typically reflective of this training prescription. So if you do a load of concentric ballistic work for a month, you'll generally find that you'll generally find that the squat jump goes up, max strength might stay the same, and you might find that the CMJ stays about the same as well. Another scenario, if you do a load of eccentric ballistic work, you'll generally find that max strength might stay about the same. It might even sometimes go backwards a little bit, but generally we get a larger EUR. In turn, we get a higher counter movement jump. The other thing is as well, like I'll review this stuff and I will test it every 4 to 6 weeks, sometimes even quicker. Generally, this is quite potent training, so it's soon ripe, it's soon rotten. And we can see that when I gave an athlete 12 weeks or kind of 3 or 4 months of maximal strength training, it became stagnant to that athlete. In the end, they stopped responding to it before we needed to do ballistic work. I do think there is some value in in profiling and training approach jumps for athletes who need to dominate in the air. So potentially a centre half that knows they're going to go up against Haaland in a number of weeks' time or something like that. Potentially, what can we do to allow them to compete in the air more effectively? In summary, overall, the CMJ has strong and moderate relationships with various measures of multi-directional speed, with the strongest correlation seen in acceleration. So generally, the higher you can jump, the better your capacity is to be able to display multi-directional speed, in particular with acceleration. The ceiling for strong enough might be a lot lower than what we think, and we might be putting strength on people and actually not moving the needle on their jumps and not moving the needle on their sprints as well. Without profiling an athlete, they may be receiving an inappropriate training prescription. Using the EUR, that would inform whether an athlete will best benefit from an eccentric or concentric themed program. And then on top of that, use the loaded jump profile, use the Bosco Index, or use something like your strength training benchmarks, what you introduced. That may inform whether this can follow a max strength or more ballistic theme. So first of all, thank you very much. I appreciate that's a lot of information. I tried to condense it down as best as possible, but as you can see, I'm very passionate about this stuff as well. I've got a little bit of a tendency to ramble. So I believe there would be a few questions in the chat. As a thank you for listening to me today, you can have the loaded jump profiling tool, which is an Excel spreadsheet. You can have that for free. If you scan that QR code, it takes you to a download link for that. And luckily, that does all the calculations for you. That will spit out whether an athlete needs ballistic or maximum strength training. My social media at Sharp Training Systems on Instagram, that's where I post most of my stuff. That's probably the best place to get me. Email, I'm okay on as well. If you have any questions, definitely feel free to reach out if we're not able to kind of get through all the questions now. But again, thank you to Output Sports for their continued support as well and the opportunity to present tonight. So thank you very much.